temperance movement was one of the largest movements in Australia, often generated out of women. That actually ended up having a political influence, didn't it?
Oh yes, the Women's Christian Temperance Union. I mean, it starts in Australia in Sydney in 1885, but the really active branch was the Adelaide branch, which starts the following year. And basically led by Elizabeth Nicholls, who had just a genius for activism. And the Women's Christian Temperance Union, its first concern was the reduction of alcohol consumption among men throughout the colonies, because that was leading to poverty, and it was also leading to shocking domestic abuse and just the men neglecting their families. And so the Women's Christian Temperance Union firmly believed that the best way to ensure that we have good legislation in terms of alcohol consumption, and they expanded their interest to other things, is to ensure that women have the vote. If women have the vote, then representatives will have to listen to them. And so the Women's Christian Temperance Union agitated for women to get the vote. In fact, in 1894, there was a petition around South Australia which gained 11,000 votes to get women the vote. Now, later in that year, they did actually get the vote, but 8,000 or 70% of those signatures were actually gotten by women working with the Women's Christian Temperance movement. So you cannot understand why South Australia awarded women the vote in 1894, second only to New Zealand, without understanding the phenomenal role of Elizabeth Nicholls and the Women's Christian Temperance movement. And in their constitution, they state very clearly, our standard of faith is the Bible. And Nicholls herself was not just a distributor of Christian tracts, but also, like so many others we've spoken about, a Sunday school teacher.
This wasn't a small movement, which is the point you're making about South Australia. Across the country at that time, there were literally thousands of women involved in this movement.
Oh, absolutely. Just a few years later, after it starts in South Australia, they have 1,100 members just in South Australia, and they had groups in most of the states, and it was actually an organisation which began in America, I believe. This was a large movement. They wrote letters to the federal conventions, also trying to encourage the inclusion of God in the preamble. This was a tremendously dynamic and influential movement.
Interesting that it's often portrayed as a bunch of wowsers.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's not uncommon in terms of historians and critics of Christianity in Australia describing Christians, evangelicals in particular, because they were very much opposed to the overconsumption of alcohol, and they genuinely thought that the best example to set is to be a teetotal, to not consume any alcohol. But that was also something of a mainstream view in the 18th and the 19th century in Australia. The idea that alcohol is having such a pernicious effect, the best thing to do is just not to have it at all.
Yeah, and it wasn't that here's a thing people are enjoying, we need to stop it. It's like, here's something that people are abusing and ruining our country.
Everyone was talking about what at the time was called the social problem in the late 19th and early 20th century. And there were several aspects to the social problem, but one of them was shocking binge drinking. It was a really serious problem. It was not just, again, impacting individual men, it was destroying their families, it was destroying their livelihoods, it was harmful to children, it was harmful to their wives. Everyone saw this as a problem.
Steve, thanks very much.
It's been an honour. Thank you very much, Karl.